Welcome to the Lost Worlds podcast. All right, settle in, everyone. This deep dive is taking us into some really unexpected territory. We're exploring a theory, a fascinating one, that suggests a possible connection between the ancient Maya and, well, cultures right here in North America.
Specifically in Florida and Georgia. It's quite a surprising idea for many.
It really is. And we're pulling all this from some intriguing material over on lostworlds.org. Articles, research notes, that kind of thing.
That's right. The sources we're looking at today are focused squarely on this claim, this idea that parts of the U.S. Southeast might have had, a significant Maya presence, or at least influence, particularly from a group called the Potent Maya.
Centuries before Europeans showed up.
Exactly. Long before.
So our mission today is basically to unpack these claims, look at the evidence, the sources present. We want to lay it out for you, help you understand what's being proposed, why it's, well, frankly, so intriguing.
And maybe why it challenges some of the standard historical narratives we're used to.
Definitely. So where do we even start looking for evidence of something like this? I mean, Maya in Florida.
Well, you almost have to begin with the very first European accounts, right?
Yeah.
The earliest written records we have from the region. So let's set the scene. It's 1539.
Okay.
The Spanish conquistador, Hernando de Soto, he arrives in Florida. And like pretty much every explorer back then, his main goal is
Gold.
gold. Instantly. He starts asking the local native populations, where's the gold? And they consistently point him toward a specific area inland. They tell him that's where you'll find it.
And they give him a name for this place.
They did. Ocala, pronounced like modern Ocala. And this is the first place De Soto gets these, really strong reports about gold being in Florida.
He actually wrote back to the King of Spain about it, didn't he? Mentioning Ocala specifically.
He did. He described it as so large and praised that he dare not repeat all that is said. That's quite a statement. He mentions many trades, much intercourse meaning trade, and specifically an abundance of gold and silver and many pearls.
Wow. That sounds like a pretty significant place. Not just some small village. Lots of activity, wealth.
It really does sound like it. And this is where the theory in our source material really starts building its case. It begins, interestingly enough, with the names themselves.
Okay. Like Ocala.
Exactly. You have Ocala in Florida, which De Soto's describing as this large province or town. Now compare that name to a well-known province down in Mexico known to the Spanish as Ocala, or sometimes Acalan.
Ocala. Okay, yeah, they sound very similar. And Ocala in Mexico was controlled by
The Potent Maya, or sometimes called the Putin Maya.
Ah, okay, the Potent Maya. I've heard them called the seafarers of the New World. Is that right?
That's exactly how the source describes them. They were renowned maritime traders, really dominated the coastal trade routes all around Central America, and their home province in Mexico, called Ocala,
Which means?
something like land of the canoe people. Pretty fitting, right? And yes, they were known for massive trade networks, and importantly, they were definitely associated with gold.
Okay, so Ocala in Florida, Ocala in Mexico, controlled by these seafaring Potent Maya, known for trade and gold. The name similarity is striking, especially considering, Spanish transliteration of native words.
It really is. But the source says the name connections don't stop there.
Oh, what else?
Well, De Soto also recorded the names of specific towns within that Ocala province in Florida. He mentions two, Ucutin and Potano.
Ucatan and Potano. Okay.
Now, look south again to Mexico, near the Potent Maya. Their neighbors were known as the Yocotan
Yucatan, Iquatan,
and the Potent Maya themselves, as we said, also called Putin or Potan.
So Potano in Florida, Potampatun in Mexico. Wow. Okay, so we have Ocala, Ocala, Ucatan, Yucatan, and Potano, Potampatun. Those parallels are pretty hard to ignore.
They are quite specific, aren't they? And the source points out one more subtle naming thing from De Soto. He mentions a smaller town near the main Ocala called Etocale.
Etocale, like a diminutive.
Kind of. The source notes that the Potomaya in Mexico had this naming convention where they'd refer to Great Acalan, Guayacala, and also Small Acalan. So having a large Ocala and a smaller Etocale in Florida. The source presents that pattern as another little linguistic echo.
Okay, the names are definitely piling up. That's compelling. But, could it still just be coincidence? What else did the sources offer beyond names?
Right, good question. And this is where it gets, I think, really fascinating because it moves into practices into daily life stuff.
Yeah.
De Soto's accounts from Ocala in Florida, they include these surprisingly specific details about agriculture and animals.
Like what?
Well, he reported lots of corn, which is maybe not surprising. But also, turkeys kept in pens, herds of tame deer, and very specifically, small, mute dogs that were raised for food.
Okay, wait. Turkeys in pens, tame deer, and mute dogs raised to be eaten. That does sound quite distinctive.
It really is.
Yeah.
And the source connects this directly to known Maya practices.
Mm.
The Maya were famous for raising turkeys. One early Spanish account called the Maya area the land of the turkey and the deer.
Right.
And archaeologically, we have evidence. El Mirador, for instance, suggests the Maya were raising turkeys way back, maybe 300 BC. And at Mayapan, there's evidence they were managing deer populations, keeping them nearby.
Okay, so turkeys and deer line up. What about the dogs? De Soto actually wrote they were good food.
He did. And that the locals rear them in the houses in order to eat them. The source points out that the only known mute dog breed in the Americas at that time was the Techichi from Mexico.
The Techichi.
And yes, these dogs were absolutely raised and fattened for food by several groups in Mesoamerica, including the Maya, especially on Cozumel Island, which was a huge Maya trading hub.
So let me get this straight. De Soto in Florida is describing multiple practices, penned turkeys, managed deer, and raising specific mute dogs for food that directly mirror known, documented Maya practices down in Mexico.
That's precisely the connection the source makes. And it gets better because there's an archaeological link, too.
To the dogs.
To the dogs. The Techichi dog was often depicted in ceramic pots, especially from Colima in Mexico, which traded with the Maya. Now, the source notes that similar dog pots showing what looks like the Chihuahua breed, which many researchers think descended from the Techichi, those pots have actually been found in Georgia.
In Georgia, dog pots like the Mexican ones.
Yep, providing a potential physical archaeological link for this very specific cultural practice spanning that huge distance.
Wow. Okay, connecting De Soto's words to actual artifacts like that really starts to build a stronger case. What else did De Soto notice there in Ocala?
He also mentioned seeing broad roads leading into the Ocala villages.
Broad roads.
Yeah. The source highlights this as consistent with the Potamaya, who were known for building infrastructure, causeways, roads to support their extensive trade networks.
Makes sense for traders.
Exactly. And there's also a strategic angle the source brings up. Apparently, De Soto searched but never actually found the main center of Ocala.
He couldn't find it?
Nope. And the source suggests, well, maybe the native guides deliberately led him astray, misdirected him, because they understood the threat he represented.
And is that something the Potent Maya did?
Yes, the source points out that's a strategy the Potent Maya were known to use against the Spanish in Mexico, diverting them to protect their key settlements and trade centers.
Okay, so let's recap De Soto's time. We've got the striking name similarities, province, towns. We've got shared specific practices like raising turkeys, deer, those Techichi dogs for food, evidence of trade infrastructure like broad roads, and even possibly similar strategies for dealing with the Spanish. That's quite a cluster of correlations just from those first reports.
It really is. The source argues it builds a pretty strong initial picture, all drawn from those 16th century accounts and linked directly to what we know about the Maya, especially the Potent Maya.
Okay, so let's jump forward then. About 30 years or so, right? To 1564, the French arrive.
Right. They established Fort Caroline, near the mouth of the St. Johns River in Florida. That's northeast of where Ocala was thought to be.
And do their accounts add anything to this Maya connection theory?
They absolutely do. The French, predictably, also started hearing about gold, but the source highlights who they heard it from, a tribe they called the Potanu.
Potanu. Sounds a lot like Potano, Potan.
Exactly. The source emphasizes that similarity. And this Potan tribe, according to the French, controlled gold deposits located way up north, inland, in the Appalachian Mountains of what's now Georgia.
Georgia gold, controlled by a tribe with a Potan-like name in Florida.
Yes, and they were apparently shipping this gold south through Florida. The French actually saw evidence of wealth, too.
What did they see?
Their accounts, and especially the illustrations by Jacques Lemoyne, who was an artist with the expedition, they detail some impressive things. Leaders wearing big circular plates of gold and silver in battle, some as large as a moderate-sized platter.
Wow, like shields.
Maybe ceremonial. The source notes they look strikingly similar to gold discs found at the Mayan site of Chichen Itza.
Interesting comparison. What else?
They also mention gold mixed with brass, silver that wasn't fully refined, quivers decorated with golden arrowheads, really intricate textiles made of feathers.
Feather textiles. The Maya were famous for those, weren't they?
Highly renowned for them, yes. And the French also saw green and blue stones used as axe heads, which they speculated might be emeralds or other precious stones.
Okay, so definitely sounds like a culture with access to resources and wealth. Did the French describe how they got the gold from Georgia?
Lemoyne did. He described the mining as digging ditches and rivers to collect the gold-bearing sand, and crucially, he detailed the transport route
Which was?
from the Appalachian Mountains, the Georgia Appalachians, down via a great river, which the French called the River of May. That's the St. Johns River.
The St. John's, which flows into the Atlantic but goes way inland into Florida first.
Exactly. So the source traces this potential route. The gold deposits in southern Georgia are in rivers that flow into the Altamaha system, which hits the coast.
Yeah.
The theory is the gold comes down the coast, maybe via canoe, then enters the mouth of the St. Johns River in North Florida.
And the St. John's basically cuts west across a good chunk of the state, a potential shortcut.
A major shortcut towards the peninsula's interior. The source argues this is exactly what was happening. The St. Johns flows toward the Ocala River Valley.
Which is near modern Ocala and Silver Springs.
Precisely. This is where the source suggests the province of Ocala was likely centered, perfectly positioned to receive these shipments coming down the St. Johns. And the French accounts fit, saying the Potenu controlled this route and the gold.
Okay, but that's still deep inside Florida. How would they get the gold from there, say, back to Mexico, if that was the ultimate destination?
That's the next key piece the source points out. From Silver Springs, which is about the headwaters of the Ocala, there's an overland portage, not too long, maybe 24 miles or so,
The portage.
to another river system, Rainbow Springs, which feeds into the Withlacoochee River, and the Withlacoochee flows directly out to the Gulf of Mexico.
So St. John's in from the Atlantic, Ocklawaha west, short overland hop, then Withlacoochee out to the Gulf.
You got it. A cross-Florida route connecting the Atlantic Trade Network to the Gulf Trade Network. And the source makes a really stunning observation here.
What's that?
That exact route, using the Ocklawaha and Withlacoochee with a portage between them, that's the precise path Florida tried to build the cross-Florida barge canal in the 20th century.
No way. The same route.
The very same. The source argues, look, if modern engineers saw the strategic value of this shortcut, wouldn't master navigators and traders like the Potomaya have recognized it centuries earlier?
That's a very powerful point. The geography itself supports the feasibility. And this whole network idea, gold from Georgia, down the coast, into the St. John's, across Florida via the rivers and portage out to the Gulf, it could explain something else too, couldn't it? Like why maybe we don't find tons of gold artifacts from that period right there in the southeast.
Exactly. The source suggests the gold wasn't primarily for local use. It was a commodity, being extracted in North America and shipped out, likely back towards the Maya heartland or other trading partners in Mexico via the Gulf. Export, essentially.
So adding the French accounts, we have more confirmation of a Poten-like tribe, details of wealth, a specific Georgia to Florida gold route using rivers, and a geographically logical cross-peninsula path that lines up with modern engineering plans. What about archaeology? Does the ground itself back any of this up?
It does. The source ties in findings from archaeological sites, particularly west of where Ocala was probably located, near that Gulf exit route. Crystal River. Okay, I've heard of it. What's significant there?
Well, first, the architecture. It has flat-topped pyramids made of shell and limestone arranged around a central plaza. The source highlights this as the first known example of that specific layout in Florida.
And that layout is Maya-like. It's consistent with Maya site planning, yes. And the artifacts found there are also suggestive. Pottery with what some interpret as Mayan glyphs or religious symbols, plus sophisticated copper and even silver ear spools dating back really early, like the 1st century AD.
Wow, silver that early.
Yeah, suggesting this site wasn't just a late phenomenon. It was important, likely involved in long-distance trade, for well over 1,000 years before De Soto showed up.
First, flat-topped mounds in Florida, possible Maya symbols, early dates. That definitely fits the idea of a long-standing, significant connection.
It does seem to align. And then just downriver, like half a mile from Crystal River, there's another complex, Roberts Island.
Okay.
The source points out Roberts Island has stepped shell pyramids.
Stepped pyramids. And that connects how?
They're noted as being similar in form to pyramids found at a known Potomaya port called Isla de los Cerros, down in Tabasco, Mexico.
Isla de los Cerros. Where was that?
It was a crucial port for the Maya city of Comalcalco. And strategically, it was right there on Mexico's Isthmus of Tehuantepec.
The narrowest part of Mexico. The ancient land bridge trade route between the Pacific and the Gulf.
Exactly. The source draws that parallel. Just like the U.S. government once considered a canal there before Panama, the ancients clearly recognized its value. The location and the type of architecture at Isla de los Cerros suggest it was a major hub in a huge network. The source implies the Florida sites might have played a similar strategic role.
So the very style and placement of archaeological sites in Florida seem to mirror important Maya trade centers in Mexico.
That's the argument the source makes. It also mentions that the Olmec, who were predecessors of the Maya in that same isthmus region, also controlled similar routes much earlier, citing sites like Tacalicabaj on the Pacific side. So there's a deep history of this kind of strategic trade control in that lineage.
And didn't we already mention the archaeological link with the dog pots?
We did, yeah. Finding those Chihuahua-like pots in Georgia, similar to the Tachichi pots from Mexico, provides that tangible artifact link supporting the historical accounts about the dogs. It ties the practices seen by De Soto to actual objects found far apart.
Okay. Is there anything else, any other mentions?
Just briefly, the source notes some later Spanish accounts from the 1560s. They mention a tribe called the Mayaca, living south of Lake George, which is east of where Ocala province was thought to be.
Mayaca. Sounds like Mayaca.
It does. And other similar names pop up around then, too, like Mayahuaca, Miami, recorded by a shipwrecked Spaniard named Fontanada. The source doesn't lean too heavily on these, but presents them as just another potential layer, another possible linguistic hint of a Maya presence or memory in the region.
Right. So if we try to pull all these threads together now, what the source material is presenting is quite a list. You've got these really uncanny name similarities for the province, the towns, the tribes. Ocala, Potanapotan, Uquachaniacatan.
Yeah.
Then you have the shared and quite specific cultural practices De Soto described. The turkeys, the managed deer, the Tachichi dogs for food.
Yeah, very specific.
Then the detailed accounts from both Spanish and French about long-range trade, focused on gold coming from Georgia, being handled by a Poten-like group in Florida.
Right, the Potano controlling that trade.
Plus the strategic geography, that cross-Florida route that makes so much sense and even mirrors modern canal plans.
The striking point.
And finally, the archaeology. The unique Crystal River architecture. The stepped pyramids at Roberts Island mirroring the Maya port. The possible Maya symbols on pottery, the early dates, and even those dog pots linking Georgia back to Mexico.
When you lay it all out like that, the source argues that this cumulative evidence, coming from different angles, linguistics, ethnohistory, archaeology, geography, it paints a really compelling picture.
It strongly suggests, according to these sources, that maybe Ocala wasn't just another local Mississippian-related group, that it could have actually been, well, Poten Maya or closely related groups.
Or at least deeply integrated into their trade network for centuries, acting as a sort of northern outpost or partner.
Yeah. It suggests a level of connection, interaction between Mesoamerica and the Southeast U.S. that's, well, it's far beyond what you usually read in history books, and maybe going back way further than Columbus or De Soto, maybe over 1,000 years.
It really does challenge that idea of these regions being totally separate worlds. The Poten Maya were incredible mariners. The geography of Florida, especially that river shortcut, it just seems to fit so well with their known skills and their economic focus.
Which brings us back, I guess, to the main point of this deep dive. We've explored this theory based on the sources from lostworlds.org, suggesting this really significant, maybe surprising, Maya presence or influence way up in ancient Florida and Georgia.
It forces you to think, doesn't it, about how sophisticated and extensive ancient connections might have been,
Right.
even across open water and vast distances, more than we often give them credit for.
Absolutely. So here's a final thought maybe for you to chew on. If a theory like this, supported by these different lines of evidence, historical accounts, names, practices, archaeology, geography, if it holds water, what does that imply about the sheer complexity, the scale of ancient human networks in the Americas?
Yeah.
And how might digging into these kinds of alternative views, these challenging perspective, how might that change or maybe even enrich our whole understanding of American history?
It definitely opens up some big, fascinating questions about the past, that's for sure.
It really does. Well, we hope this deep dive gave you some food for thought on this intriguing claim. You might even want to look up some of those original sources, De Soto's Chronicles, the French accounts, maybe read more about Crystal River or Isla de los Cerros.
Yeah, there's always more detail to find in the sources themselves if you're curious.
Absolutely. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.